Hello everyone, welcome back. I appreciate you watching my video. This time, I bought an interesting watch, an Omega Speedmaster, sold for parts. The problem is obvious. Many parts are missing. But technically, if I can get missing parts, I can rebuild the watch. That should be easy, and what I will do in this video. So I bought a lot of parts. These are new chronograph pushers. This is a case back, and this also looks new. This is a crown. This is a used one, but should be fine. This is a new movement, the Omega 1150 movement. I couldn't find genuine hands, so as a compromise solution, I bought a cheap Chinese hands for now. The movement is running, but I will service it before using it. Before servicing the movement, I assembled the case. It was easy. I installed new pushers. That's all. It already looks like a Speedmaster. Let's move on to the movement. This was a new old stock, but it's more than 20-year-old. It would need new oil, so I'm disassembling it to clean the parts and lubricate them. To remove the date wheel safely, we need to align the date and date wheels as shown on the video. This movement has many watch complications like chronograph, calendar, moon phase, and so on. So there are a lot of parts to remove. I put a cover when removing a spring. If I didn't cover them, I would have to find parts flying far away. These parts are for the moon phase, and actually it is useless for this watch because the dial doesn't have a moon phase window. We don't need to remove the silver screw. Actually, it is an adjuster for the quick set. I'm disassembling the calendar works. There is a spring under the cover plate, so I removed the cover carefully. The T-shaped yoke is used to shift the moon phase. I will show you how the moon phase works later in this video. After removing the date pointer wheel, we can remove the first plate, that is the calendar platform. I know there is another jumpy spring underneath, so I removed it carefully. This is a 24 hours wheel. This is driven by the calendar driving wheel. These parts are for the hour counting wheel. We can see a plastic part, and it is used to lock the hour counting wheel when the chronograph is stopped. This lever is for the day's quick set. A typical watch uses the crown for the day quick set, but this watch has a dedicated push button for it. We can see pivots for the chronograph hands. These are easy to bend, so we need to pay attention not to damage them when disassembling the dial side. This is the cannon pinion of this movement. This connects the other side with this side. I flipped the movement to disassemble the backside. I removed the automatic winding roller. I'm removing some parts around the balance wheel before removing the balance wheel. The movement looks like it is running nicely, but as I inspected the details, all oil was dried, as I expected. I'm removing the automatic device bridge, but I should remove the big spring before removing the plate, not to damage other parts. Otherwise, fortunately, this time I didn't lose or damage other parts around, but anyway, this is the spring I should remove before removing the plate. This plastic part stops the center chronograph wheel when the chronograph is stopped. Using plastic as a stopper makes sense to me because it won't damage the chronograph wheel. But I noticed the later version of this movement, the Omega 1151, uses a metal version of the part. I don't know which is better, but there would be a reason for the change. I'm removing the chronograph bridge and some chronograph parts around. Then I removed the chronograph cam that switches the chronograph running and stopped. I disassembled all watch complications. This is the base movement. I already removed a lot of parts, but I still have a movement to disassemble. But I like servicing this kind of complex movement, and I have serviced some chronograph watches. I still own all of them, but actually I don't use the chronograph function. Somehow I feel satisfied to have such an watch on my arm. So this watch was one of my dream watches to repair because it's the most complicated watch I could realistically buy and confidently repair. By the way, this was an unused movement, and this was the first time I disassembled such an untouched movement. So I tried to see how the factory lubricates the movement. But I didn't see so many signs of old oil or grease. Most oil and grease seemed dried cleanly. I'm disassembling the last parts of this movement. This movement uses a characteristic design on the keyless works. The odd-shaped spring has two blades, and that keeps parts in position. It's easy to disassemble and assemble, in my opinion. This is the last part, and I completed the disassembly. Let's clean the parts. Since there are many parts, I cleaned them step by step and little by little. I polished gels to remove old oil. Then I put them in a watch parts cleaning solution and cleaned them with an ultrasonic cleaner for 3 minutes. I rinsed them with water with ultrasonic cleaner, and after that I rinsed them with isopropyl alcohol to remove water from the parts. After the cleaning, I dried them under a cover. Some parts require a different cleaning solution. I used benzene for the balance wheel and pallet fork. I also used an ultrasonic cleaner for these parts, but just for 1 minute, not to break them. I didn't count the number of parts, but there would be more than 100. Here is all the parts. It's time to build a watch. I started with assembling the keyless works. This is the Omega 1150 movement. That is the Omega version of the ETA 7751 movement. It is a variant of the most popular mechanical chronograph movement, the ETA 7750. The calendar part is only the difference between the 7751 and 7750. The 7751 has the triple date calendar with moon phase, and the other has a standard day and date calendar. Other parts are the same. The movement parts I originally bought came with the complete calendar parts. So my initial plan was to buy a 7750 to get a bottom half of the movement to build a complete 7751 movement. Because the 7750 was used in many watch brands of watches, it was relatively easy to find and cheaper than the 7751. But I decided to spend a few more $100 to get this original Omega movement. You may have a question. Building a Speedmaster from parts is reasonable or not? My short answer is no. You can find those parts relatively easily on eBay, but only the movement costs about $600 US, and the dial costs another $300. Finding a case would be a challenge. It may cost $1,000 US depending on the condition. If you have money to buy those parts, you can buy a good Speedmaster of the same model at the same cost. But my one was slightly different. I'm buying a watch to enjoy a repair rather than being an owner of a watch. And this movement was one of the movements that I have wanted to work on. So I had been looking for a reasonable project watch for a long time. It didn't need to be an Omega, so my initial plan was building a custom watch with a standard ETA movement. But I found the Omega case with a dial sold at reasonable price due to the damage. So I decided to build the Speedmaster. After getting it, I spent another few months to get other parts cheaply, rather than spending a lot of money to get parts in a short time. I don't like to talk about the cost of a watch, but let's say the total cost may be about 1,000 US dollars. It's not cheap, but I would say this would be the cheapest Speedmaster in the world this year. Recently, I finally found the bottom half of an Omega movement for sale. It was the Omega 1151 and the color is silver, not gold. But anyway, I bought it. Alright, let's get back to the video. These parts are to start and stop the chronograph. I'm installing the lock function. When install this part, the chronograph should be in this state. There is a notch on the cam and the lock should mesh with the notch. I'm not a professional watchmaker, but from my experience, assembling a chronograph in the running or unlocked state is easier than assembling it in the stopped or locked state, because the lock will not block the chronograph wheel. I will show you later what happens if the lock blocks the wheel. A good point of this movement is that we can easily find the technical guides on the internet provided by ETA and Omega. I referred to both of them and followed their instructions. Not 100%, but almost. Now I'm struggling with the most annoying part of this movement. We need to install the tiny pinion and place the clutch in the position. Since the clutch should be under the spring, we need to be careful not to touch the spring, otherwise it can pop off. I'm installing some wheels for the automatic winding devices. And I also installed the chronograph hammer. That spring is for a reversing wheel. I'm installing the wheel. Installing it is a challenge because we need to tweak the spring without removing the clutch underneath. The real challenge is installing the automatic bridge. It's hard to explain, but if you accidentally touch any one of those installed parts, you will have to install them again. And this is what I mentioned earlier. The lock was not in the position. It should lock the wheel in position or unlock the center wheel like this. I don't remember how many times I tried, but I think this was the fourth or fifth try to place the bridge. Every time I had to install all the parts and try to place the bridge. And finally, I succeeded. There are 6 checkpoints on this step. This is the spring for the hammer, and this is the spring for the clutch. Now it's a good time to have a quick check on the chronograph device. I'm installing the pallet fork and the balance assembly to test the base movement with the chronograph device. It should run, but let's see how it runs. So far, so good. Let's install the balance wheel. Alright, no surprise, it runs without any issues. So I'm lubricating the balance cap jewels. I unlocked the shock spring to remove the jewels. Then I polished the flat side of the cap jewel to remove old oil and put a tiny amount of new oil on the center of the polished side. This shock spring is very fragile, so I'm trying to touching as gentle as possible when I opening or closing the spring. I did the same on the other set on the other side. I'm finalizing the backside assembly. I installed the minute counter jumper and I installed the clutch spring again. Then I tested the chronograph function. It should be able to start and stop and reset. Let's move on to the dial side. This side has more watch complications to assemble. I'm installing the Canon pinion and minute wheels. There are so many pivots and contact points to lubricate before placing parts. This is the first watch complication on this side. This is a quick set for the day. This is another watch complication. That is the 24 hours wheel. This is an hour wheel, but it was not installed correctly at this moment. I will fix it later. I'm installing parts for the hour counting wheel. This is the spring for the hammer, which is a bit tricky to install. I managed to assemble the hour counting wheel, but I noticed the center hour wheel was not installed in the position. So I fixed it. Then placed the calendar platform on the base plate. Following the technical guide, I positioned the calendar driving wheel and date star wheel like that. And in my understanding, it is to install hands easily later. But for me, it didn't work. So I struggled to install hands. I'm assembling the moon phase quick set. Since this dial hides the moon phase, I don't need to assemble this part. But I just wanted to see how it works before hiding the feature. Assembling the triple date calendar with moon phase sounds very complicated or very difficult, but actually it isn't. They are implemented with minimum, well-designed parts. I'm assembling the last watch complication, the calendar. The center wheel indicates the date, and there are discs for month and day. The T-shaped yoke shifts the moon phase every day. And this is the last part, the cover plate. Before putting a dial, let's see how the moon phase works before hiding it. When a day is changed, the yoke will shift the moon phase. That's how the moon phase works. The month and day mechanism is more straightforward. The calendar driving wheel for the day disk and date wheel every 24 hours. And the date wheel was the intermediate wheel every 31 days to change a month. Movement assembly is completed. The last challenge is installing hands because it might be more complicated than assembling the movement. This movement has 8 hands to be aligned in total. I started with installing the 24 hours hand. After setting the time to midnight, I installed the 24 hours hand at 0 o'clock. Then I installed the small second hand. Before installing day pointer, I set the date to the end of a month. This is important because the month should be changed at the first day of a month. The clearance between the date pointer and the second hand was tight. This might be due to the quality issue, but I managed it after several attempts. And Let's see a moment that changed the month. Looks good. So I installed minutes and hours counter hands off camera, and I'm setting the time to midnight again to install the hour and minute hands at 0 o'clock. That's how I installed the hands. This is the moment of reverse. I installed the movement in the case and secured it with case clamps. I installed the automatic rotor, crown, and case back after that, but I'm sorry I lost video clips of the scene, so I cannot show the scene, but there was nothing special. So anyway, this is the final result. I repaired this watch a few months ago, and after that, it's on my arm every day. The dial and case has some damages but are still nice looking. It runs without any issues. It's a perfect watch for daily use. Alright, that's all for this video. Thank you for always watching my video. I hope you enjoyed this one. If so, please leave your likes and subscribe to my channel. I'll be back with another watch soon. See you then. Bye bye.